and welcome to another episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arper. And on today's episode, I am delighted to introduce Ben Leapman. Ben is the editor of a newspaper called Inside Time, which is specifically for prisoners. And I'm really delighted to share with you insights into why have a newspaper for prisoners? You know, what goes on behind prisons? How does gossip work? How do people share information and knowledge when their liberty has been taken away and their access to news and information has been so clearly restricted? So let's get into it. Ben, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to be a guest on All Things Conflict today. I haven't known you that long. We only had a conversation about a week or two ago, but I have known of you for some time because you are actually the editor of a publication called Inside Time, which has an amazing dedicated readership, and I'll get you to talk a little bit about that shortly. And the reason that I thought it would be useful is because there's a lot of things that go on kind of behind the scenes in the justice system that the public are just not aware of. They have no clue of the workings of these things. And I think what you're doing is incredibly useful and productive and helpful to people who are experiencing some of the worst times of their life. And so maybe I could invite you to just say a few words about yourself and the work you do.
Sure. Well, Inside Time is a publication that's been around since 1990. We were launched. And for 35 years now, we've been serving the prisoner population of the UK. So we circulate print copies to every month to every prison. And we're very widely read, very popular on the wings. The prison officers tend to put a bundle on every wing, and it goes very quickly. People are very keen to get our paper because it's full of news and information about the justice system, about prisons, and it's got crosswords, it's got cartoons, and it's a voice for prisoners. Our slogan is a voice for prisoners because we publish in every issue about 9 pages of readers' letters, which is an outlet for prisoners to have their views heard, whether it's on things that are going wrong in their prison, and a lot of our letters are complaints about the prison system, whether it's or about wider issues, whether it's about politics or religion or what have you. So it's a debating point and a platform for prisoners to be heard, who are often silenced in other media. It doesn't really reflect prisoners' point of view. So yeah, we do something very quite unique. Other countries don't have national prison newspapers in the way that the UK does. So we're fortunate in that regard. And I've been the editor now since 2022. I was a Fleet Street journalist before that for 20 years. I then spent a bit of time in prison myself. And having come out, I'm now in this unique role where I am able to use my journalism expertise and my prison expertise. And we've got other ex-prisoners on the staff of the paper, which is important, I think, because it's quite a unique experience being in prison, and you need to know what you're talking about. So we go from strength to strength. I think every issue we're bringing in new features, new ideas, and the feedback we get from our readers, is very, very positive. A lot of prisoners write to us. They send us their letters, they send us their poems, they send us their raps, and they tell us that we're very valuable, which keeps us going.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think there were 2 or 3 things that I really would like to pick up on from what I heard you say. And firstly, you're absolutely right. I mean, I go into prisons quite a lot, and I work with groups of men, and we train them in the dialogue roadmap. But, often they'll be talking about, has the new Inside Time come out? Is it out yet? Is it on the wing? they'll refer to articles, and perhaps in the training, if I say things that hit on a note, I'll hear, yeah, somebody wrote about that in Inside Time. And so it is a dedicated readership, especially as it's a print, it's a printed, it's a tangible asset, isn't it?
Well, that's very much, we're one of the few papers that are still largely going in print, and obviously throughout the newspaper industry the last 20 years have been a time of huge turmoil as readerships go online and onto smartphones. In prisons, largely most prisons have no in-cell tech, and they still read us in print form on the paper. That is changing a little bit slowly and rather belatedly, but the prison system is catching up with tech. And nowadays, about 15,000 readers in England and Wales prisons do read us, do have in-cell launchpad technology, which is provided by the prison service. And those prisons where that does exist, they have the choice of reading us on paper or electronically. And a lot of them do choose to read electronically. I was in Swaleside prison just before Christmas, and speaking to some guys who are long-term prisoners there who'd long read the paper on paper format. And I said to them, do you still read the paper? They said, oh, no, we prefer to get it in our cells now and on our screens. So and we're on Launchpad. We're also on Coracle devices that some prisoners have, and in some private prisons we're on their systems that they have. So it's a bit of both, but still majority of it is print, and we take great care and attention over our print issue because that's the way that most readers see us.
Absolutely. And then you talked about employing people with lived experience, and that you actually have some lived experience yourself, and how important that is, because again, for people that don't have anything to do with prisons and incarceration and the way we lock people up and the way we push people through a so-called justice system, I think it's really important because there's a whole language, isn't there? There's a sort of jargon, there's a language, there's a whole kind of protocol, there's a whole way things should be, and then there's the way things really are, and all those unfairnesses and niggles and upsets and, as you said, complaints. And I think it's really important to be able to communicate with people from the place that they're at. And I noticed that Inside Time does that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we get a reader's letters saying that they're from a reader saying they're upset because their canteen didn't arrive, they can't get hold of the OMU, and they're trying to get a rottle, most members of the public wouldn't understand a word of it. Because we've been there, so we do understand what they're talking about. And so we're able to look into, if people have issues and complaints about those things, we sometimes take them up and investigate them on their behalf. So we know what they're talking about, but also emotionally, we know how that feels. And that makes a difference as well.
Yeah, and I think for people who come into prison, where they've never been in prison before, there's a lot of shock. There's a lot of cultural adjustment to make. There's all this language you have to learn. And where that sort of leads me, and the reason that the paper is so important is because people come into prison and they're absolutely starved of information.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumours go around on wings. People don't have access to official information. They've got tellies in their cells, so they can watch the news and they can see what's going on in the world. But that's not a way to find out what's happening in the prison system, the news that directly affects them. And they will get occasionally an information bulletin from a letter from the governor advising them on something, but that's written in official speak, and it's not always the clear, plain truth. So we try to keep our readers very well informed. We have about 6 pages of news coverage in every issue, where we're telling people the latest developments in the English and Welsh prison system, also in the Scottish prison system, which is completely separate. And there's also that we cover Northern Ireland and the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, although we can't, if you were trying to tell all the detail of all of those, it would take several newspapers, not just one. But we report what's going on, and that is important, and our readers are well informed. And often, from the letters that we get sent in to us for our mailbags pages, which are the names for our readers' letters pages, you can tell that our readers have read what's in our paper and have absorbed it and are asking questions about it. And if it doesn't tally with what they're seeing on the ground if we announce a new initiative that the government has announced, but in practice on the prisons they're not seeing that happening, then they will be quick to tell us that. So it's a two-way thing, and that helps inform our news coverage as well, because we can then go back to the prison authorities and say, well, you announced such a thing and it doesn't seem to be happening.
And then also there's the nuances between what you might hear on the news, on the mainstream news, like when the 40% reduction in non-violent crime tariffs were announced. They're just headlines, aren't they? But you've got to understand what that means, who did it affect, because what happened then, in my limited experience, was there was a whole lot of kind of rumouring and gossiping and people getting hopeful and people thinking they were getting out tomorrow and all sorts of things. And then you deal with the fallout of the disappointment because there isn't enough information. And that's where Inside Time comes in really handy.
Yeah, well, often with these announcements, the devil's in the detail, and you'll get a headline saying prisoners to be released after serving 40% of their term. But that's, as you say, that's not the end of it at all, because there are exclusions, there are categories of people who might or might not qualify for it, and then you have to work out whether you're within those or not. And eventually, you'll probably be told whether you are or not by the prison authorities. But by then, you might not be told until very shortly before the release date. So you want to know, you want to understand the system, and it is complicated. So we obviously try to report such major news in a lot more detail than the national news will. And sometimes it comes down to individual cases. We've got a story in our forthcoming paper about what happened in Scotland when they brought in a series of early releases because their prisons are very overcrowded. And in one of them, it was a 40% release point, but it was down to a governor's discretion. And they had about 400 prisoners were eligible for you had to be less than 4 years, and certain categories of offences, sexual offences, were excluded. So within the eligible cohort, there were about 400, but 150 of them got blocked by the governors and 250 went through. So, almost half were, even though they met all the criteria, were just blocked for rather opaque reasons of public safety, which are understandable, but it wasn't clear, wasn't clear to them what was going to happen until the last minute. So yeah, every time there's one of these early release schemes or any sort of scheme, they all have different rules and they work in different ways, and it's not always easy to report on exactly what's going to happen, but we do our best.
Yeah, and I think these things are really important because if there's we saw it in the post office scandal, didn't we, where the phone line operators were saying, well, you're the only one. And I'm not saying they do that in prison, but you can feel like you're the only one with this problem and therefore you're so insignificant. But if you understand that these problems exist, across the country, then there's more chance of effecting some change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with particularly our readers' letters pages, our readers can pick it up and read that someone else in a different prison has got the same sort of problem as they have. It might be about a justice measure, a sentencing issue, or it might be a issue within a prison, whether it's getting hold of a new mattress or something to do with the healthcare problem department. There's so many different facets of prison life. And for each of those facets of prison life, there are rule books and different procedures, and it is very complicated. And our readers live through that on a daily basis, and some of them can spend months or years trying to grapple with a particular problem. And they, I'm sure, welcome greatly the chance to hear from other prisoners and other prisons who are going through something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important to understand the scale of something as well, because sometimes, on the other hand, looking at it from the other side, a prisoner could be really impatient and frustrated and upset and even angry about something, but needing to realise that this is having to be addressed on a national level. And so it's not going to happen quickly with the best will in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very frustrating environment, and things are slow in prisons, and they go through lots of procedures. Yeah, one of the innovations that I've introduced as editor has been a monthly column called Wing Worries, in which we have it's like an Agony Aunt column where people write in with their frustrations. So in the main readers' letters section, if people are complaining about policies and procedures, but the Wing Worries section is about emotional issues that people are facing. And yeah, absolutely, there's a lot of hurt and upset and people in prisons who have gone through difficult things in their lives and are suffering in various ways, often ways which led them to commit the offences which led them to be in prison. And we try and offer what advice and help we can.
And that again, it's an important thing, because people need a release for their emotional content and for what's going on. We all as humans need somewhere to safe containers to put stuff in, and and I just see this whole kind of, you've got hundreds of people, in a pressure cooker, basically. You could describe a prison as a pressure cooker. And where are the release valves? And I think that that's another important sort of function that Inside Time, performs, if you like.
Well, we were introduced in 1990 in the wake of the Strangeways riot, which was a big thing at that time, where there was a lot of violence, and the whole what's now HMP Manchester was taken over by rioting prisoners for a whole week. And in the wake of that led to the Woolf Report, which led to quite a few recommendations about improving living conditions in prisons, ending slopping out. And it was in that time, that sort of culture of realizing that actually prisons are too awful, and that's not creating better people when you release them to live in those dreadful sort of environment, that in that spirit of improving the system, Inside Time was part of that system improvement, really, to give prisoners a voice and a news source that they can trust. And we've kept up that mission since then.
And there's no doubt that conditions have improved in many prisons, and there's some things are quite modern. I mean, there's still some things that are a long way behind in the sort of physical. I mean, I remember in one of the prisons we were in, they were supposed to be single cells, and the cell has a toilet in it, and then because of overcrowding, they doubled up cells that were supposed to be single cells, and because the toilet's so close to the bed, it meant that someone's sleeping with their head really near a loo that your cellmate has just used. And those things people don't really think about, because one of the questions I have is the punishment, if we're going to use a punishment system, and I'm going to do a whole episode on that, but if we're going to use a punishment system, then is the punishment we're taking your liberty away, or is the punishment we're taking your liberty away and we're going to oppress you and take away all your dignity? And it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I don't think the intention is to take away people's dignity. They do talk about decency, but somehow this happens.
Yeah, I mean, the living conditions in prisons are pretty grim. And as you say, people are sharing cells that were built in the Victorian era as single cells, and they are now double cells. So they are small and they are cramped. And you're often sharing with somebody who you don't know and don't like. And it's not pleasant. I mean, as you say, living conditions have improved, objectively speaking. When we were founded in 1990, there was no in-cell sanitation. So people were using a bucket as a toilet and slopping out in the morning, which was unpleasant, and that's improved. There are now in-cell televisions, which old timers will tell you have made wings rather more peaceful, because people are more happy to sit in their cells vegetating in front of the telly, and they're not getting as irate and frustrated at being in their cell with nothing to do. There are now, since COVID, there are now in-cell telephones across England and Wales and Scotland. People can make phone calls from their cells at night to their families and partners. Previously, though, you had to rely on a wing phone, so you could only make phone calls when the cells were unlocked. So I think that's a big, important release, that people can have better contact with their families in that way. And also they telephone the Samaritans at all hours, and they do. So yeah, there are and have been improvements, objectively speaking, but then you're still away from your family. The food is not great. The mattresses are not great. It's not a comfortable lifestyle, no matter what you read in some newspapers about it being like a holiday camp. And you get prisoners putting on a show of bravado when they get a smuggled mobile phone and posting a video of themselves to TikTok saying, "We're having a great time here." They're not having a great time.
No, it really is not a great time. And I think the one thing I did want to, when you talked about the in-cell phones, I mean, they can't receive calls.
No.
They can only make calls going out, and it is expensive.
Yes.
It's not free. The taxpayer's not paying for it. The prisoner is paying for it. I know with my, with what I do, that prisoners sometimes need to get hold of me, and they can only get hold of me on a mobile, and it is astronomical.
Yeah, it isn't cheap, and there's questions about how the contract works between the prison service and British Telecom, the provider, as to why it costs what it costs. And I mean, the ombudsman, Adrian Usher, the prison and probation ombudsman, has taken up this course. He points, because he investigates every death in prison, he points out that very often when he's investigating a suicide in prison, he will find that that person had run out of phone credits and was therefore unable to speak to their friends or family in the moments leading up to their death. And he just says, if they had been able to make that phone call, perhaps that could have been avoided. And also, he's quoted wing prison officers, who do a very difficult job and face a lot of violence and unrest. They say, "I'd rather Timmy was in his cell talking to his mum on the phone than out here on the wing having a fight with me."
Absolutely.
It seems short-sighted the way that the phone calls, the way they're charged, the way they have to be paid for. Prisoners have to save up, and they can only buy a few credits a week, and their phone calls are very rationed in that way here.
And then also the prison shop, if there's things they want to buy in the, I think, canteen, it's horrendously expensive. I was listening, I don't know, something that's £1 in the supermarket was like £4 or £5 in canteen. And then you're earning prison wages, which it could be as low as £15 a week.
Yes, I mean, it is overpriced. I think our readers are very on top of all the detail of this, and we do get letters about this. I think that probably the example you said of £1 versus £4 is probably slightly over the mark, but certainly something that would cost 90p in your local Tesco might be costing you £1.50 on the canteen. And that's a big difference if you're on £10 a week after you've got a £10 a week prison wage, or the average prison wage, as we reported the other day. It's not usually announced, but we got some documents showing the average prison wage is about £13 a week, 1-3, in a couple of years ago. It's gone up slightly since. And out of that, by the time you paid for a couple of pounds for phone credits, and then a tin of tuna or a tin of mackerel is 10% of your weekly disposable income. So these things do matter, even if it's only pence more. And there are questions about the contract in England and Wales that the prison service does it through a monopoly contract with DHL, and that's been criticised by the prison and probation ombudsman, saying, why is that really the best value for prisoners? And that's the sort of thing that Inside Time can report on, because other national newspapers aren't interested in reporting that. It's rather petty detail in the great scheme of things and wars in Iran and what have you. But for our readers, it's very, very important.
Yes, I do remember when we were working in Dartmoor before its closure, the one of the popular mainstream newspapers would take great delight in publishing what the Christmas dinner was, as if this whole sort of holiday camp idea. But you could have a roast turkey dinner in a Michelin star restaurant and a roast turkey dinner at a lay-by in a motorway, and they're two different things, and then not wanting to report on the other stuff that's more realistic about what prison life is like.
Yeah, well, I've seen prison Christmas dinners that when they say it's turkey, it is turkey, but it's like the wafer thin turkey you get out of the packet, and it really is not very festive. But the public doesn't want to think that prisoners are being punished by being sent to prison, and the public want to think of them living a life of luxury, and they really don't. The meal budget is about £3.50 per prisoner per day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And catering managers in prisons do a very difficult job in making appetizing meals out of that, and they have to produce lots of options. They have to produce a vegan menu, they have to produce a halal menu. There have to be 5 options in every meal. It's not easy to do on that level of budget, but they do it, and it's edible. I mean, no prisoner has died of malnutrition on my watch since I've been editing this paper. But it's not luxury. It really isn't.
No, it's all at the most basic level imaginable. But I suppose, I mean, there were two more things, actually three more things I wanted to sort of touch on. And the first was talking about, culture and change. And you mentioned, things being at a governor's discretion. And that's a whole other thing that can happen. A prison could get a new governor and suddenly, at that governor's discretion, the whole culture can change and the focus can change, and what's important to that prison can suddenly overnight be completely different. And I think that's an interesting thing as well, because if you're a prisoner, you're at the mercy of whatever is going on in senior management team. And then, talking about updating, and you talking about the paper coming out in 1990, was it? 1990, yeah. Yeah. The one thing that we still haven't upgraded, I know that there are prisoners that have in-cell laptops now to be able to message and things like that and read the paper online. But, it is a digital world, and we're so far behind in that within the prisons. I just wonder how. So I know people that are coming out of prison who have just not had any access to the vast changes. I mean, if you've been in prison for 10 years or 15 years, you come out, if you're in Cat D, which is the open conditions, and you come out and you've got to learn all this stuff, and there's just no preparation for it inside, where it's entirely possible to create safe conditions for people to be able to learn the digital world, because that's going to be a lot of people's best chances of getting work.
Absolutely, and the field of education and training in prison is a very important one, both in terms of keeping prisoners occupied and keeping their minds active and keeping them sane while they're inside. They need something purposeful to do, whether that's a job or education, and in terms of improving their employability when they get out. And the range of things on offer traditionally has been, it's bricklaying, or it's plumbing, it's manual skills. The ICT isn't well taught, and prisoners do leave with very little understanding of that very often. And of course, over the last 6 months or so, we've seen big cuts in prison education budgets of about 20% that have come in, which are really a serious, significant cut that's happened under this current government. So things are not likely to improve quickly in terms of that education. In terms of the tech in prisons, though, that's not really an educational thing. That's being brought in by prisons. It actually helps the prison, because in prisons that do have this, the prisoners use the in-cell tech to order their menu choices, to check savings balance, to place their canteen order. It's actually saving staff time and money, because there's less manual processing involved. So what's really holding that up is the lack of the infrastructure. I mean, these old Victorian buildings, it's not easy to get that installed in every cell, and the money hasn't been there because governments haven't seen that as a spending priority, perhaps understandably. But that's so. There's two aspects there: the teaching, the education side, and the actual just getting them into every cell. And it's not been great on either front.
No, and then I know that Inside Time isn't there to be political or campaigning or to take sides, or it's to impart knowledge and information and to support people. But but there was a time, I think, when the paper stepped in around the whole book ban. I mean, I definitely think that was it was one of those things where you sort of say, well, look, this isn't what we do, but actually here and this, we do need to say something. And I'd love you to talk about that, because that was a terrible time.
Yes, it was before I joined the paper, but certainly in 2013, when the then Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling, banned books nationwide. It did lead to quite a big public campaign. Best-selling authors and charities were campaigning against that. And the Conservative government then did overturn it. And Michael Gove in 2015 brought in, as the replacement Justice Secretary, brought in a right for prisoners to be sent books by their friends and family. And so you're right, we don't campaign on issues. We're a platform for other people to have their voices heard. We don't take an editorial stance ourselves on issues. But in terms of news reporting, we do monitor when prisons are breaking rules. And the current book ban or the current book entitlement rule is quite often in England and Wales. It's only in England and Wales that there is that a right. Scottish prisons don't have that right. It is sometimes breached by local prison governors bringing in rules saying they're not going to allow books to be sent in. And it's the issue that I take up most often on a sort of case basis. Asking the Ministry of Justice, why is this prison not allowing books to be sent in when the national rules say that they are? And we've, in a dozen, 15 cases or so, we've taken that up in the past few years. And pretty much always, eventually, the prison has, after our intervention, come into line with the national rules, which is always a great to the families affected who've been contacting us about it. And it shows that, the power of the press, even on a sort of small scale such as that, if you shine a spotlight on something that's going wrong, as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you put a bit of publicity onto it, people will realise that they can't just break rules willy-nilly. They have to comply with them.
Yeah, that's lovely. So we're coming to the end of our time together, and this has really been a lovely conversation, Ben. It's been a real joy to just be able to sort of talk through with you in this very balanced way. I mean, because it's not all bad. I mean, I've been into some prisons where I've seen some absolutely wonderful art classes, or, I've seen people making musical instruments. I've seen people doing sculptures. But it's all very luck of the draw, isn't it? Which prison you end up in.
Yes, some prisons are a lot better than others, and some people cope with being in prison better than others, and people find a way through it. People are spending years of their life in a prison. They will go through the highs and the lows, the family milestones. They're separated from their family, but they make the best of it as they can, and eventually in most cases, they will get out and resume living in society. And people have ways of getting through, whether it's the gym or whether it's reading books, whether it's taking education courses. There are certainly prisoners out there achieving things. We reported last year, for the first time, the Prison Reform Trust had a fantastic initiative called the Hope and Fulfilment Awards, which was almost like a Prisoner of the Year event, where they invited prisoners and staff to nominate prisoners who had done good work in the prison beyond just being a prisoner. So they were people who had come up with new education schemes to help other prisoners. They've been mentors for other prisoners. There was one prisoner who had helped when his cellmate was trying to hang himself, and had come and lifted him and prevented that from happening. There are, prisoners doing amazing things because, people are people. Some people do good things, some people do bad things. And the same is the case in prison. There are people out there, prisoners out there, who are every day making, life better for the people around them, and cheering people up and helping out. And it's great that that's being recognised in those awards that were given out for the first time last year, and they're doing it again this year. And we celebrate the good and the bad in prison, or we celebrate the good, we report on the bad. And it's such an unexplored area. It's such a mystery to people outside prisons. They don't see any of it. And it's a privilege, really, to have a bit of an insight into it, and to be able to do our unique bit to help out.
Oh, well, I'm delighted to hear about those awards. That's new to me, and I can think of one or two people I'd love to nominate. I don't know what the nomination process is, but I will definitely, I will look into that, certainly.
We've got an ad in our paper for the nomination, so our readers can see it and write in for people who they want to nominate.
Oh, perfect. So I think there's one last question that I have for you, and it's a question that I've asked every guest, because, this Justice Redesigned series is all about the idea that, even if we had the most perfect government with the biggest budget in the world, they still wouldn't be able to solve all the problems, and so it's all about the action that we're taking as a society. So if I were to give you the keys to the Ministry of Justice, and you're in charge, and I said, you could make one change immediately, what change would you make?
Well, when you say immediately, it's a big change. Doesn't maybe come in overnight, but I would reset sentencing, because the prison population has doubled since the days of Margaret Thatcher in England and Wales, and the sentences have doubled in length. That's why that's the reason that the prisons are overcrowded. Judges have just been giving out longer and longer sentences. The judges blame the politicians. Politicians blame the public, if you like. They say that's what the public want, but it's just a constant escalation. And this government, when it's tried to reduce the prison overcrowding population, instead of saying we're going to make the sentences shorter, they just said we serve a shorter and shorter proportion. So it was 50%, 40%. Now you're going to serve only 33% of your sentence. That leaves the public unsatisfied because it's meaningless. If someone's sentenced to 10 years in prison, they're only going to serve 3 years. The public will say that's a joke. And it used to be 3 years a sentence, and now it's just gone up and up and up. So I think just would totally reset the whole thing, start from scratch, have shorter sentences that you serve all of rather than these long ones, and base it on the risk to the public. Because the main people say prisons are there for rehabilitation. Maybe they don't. They're there for punishment. Yes, they are there for punishment, but also they protect the public, and it's the people who are a clear and present danger for the public that everybody agrees should be in prison. At the moment, in prison, there's a more and more very elderly prisoners who've been in for a long time or have been sentenced in old age or something they did a long time previously. I would focus shorter sentence, back to where we used to be on the sentences, and focusing on the people who are going to currently posing a threat to the public, not to people who are in for other reasons. And I think with the less crowded prisons, then you would get a lot more rehabilitation, education, decent living conditions, and it would work a whole lot better and be cheaper for the taxpayer.
Thank you. Thank you. And on that note, I'm going to thank you for your time. It's been a really lovely conversation. And I hope we will encounter each other and maybe do something together. I'm certainly going to look at those awards anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. It's been lovely.